I'm Alan Myers. I've been working constructing railways for 42 years now in various countries. London Underground. I was heavily involved in the Channel Tunnel, the high-speed rail links up into London, and I've been working 10 years with MTR projects. I've worked for contractors for 20-odd years, designers, consultants for 12, and as I say, MTR for a considerable time as well. So I've seen railway construction from all sides. I'm very fortunate to have done so.
Good morning. My name is Andrew McCusker. I have a 25-year experience in rail, covering construction, projects, maintenance, operation, and strategy development. For 7 years I was the operations director of the Mass Transit Railway in Hong Kong. But now I'm pleased to say that I'm with the University of Wollongong. The university has an establishment here in Dubai with some 4,000 students. And my day job is one of the Director of Logistics for the Smart Infrastructure Facility at Wollongong back in Australia, where we look at all infrastructures, and I have an institute that looks at railway engineering, railway logistics and railway operation, and we provide services to industry drawing down from the strength of the university. And I'll pass on to my next colleague, Mohammed.
Good morning. My name is Mohammed Montazeri. I'm a university lecturer, and at the same time I work in Tehran Metro. I've got 20 years of experience in different fields of Tehran Metro, for the operation, for the construction, financing department, and I'll be happy to share my knowledge with you today, and if any possible question, I'll be happy to answer you.
Good morning, my name is Joachim Winter. I'm heading the Next Generation Train project of German Aerospace. I'm serving there as a senior scientist, and my experience is more than 25 years working for Daimler and Bombardier Transportation. I was working on systems level test systems technologies for aircrafts with Dornier and Mercedes-Benz cars. So railway is the third mode of transport in my experience, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to speak afterwards to you. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Pragasam. I'm the Director of Fare Systems for the Land Transport Authority in Singapore. A position actually I've held in one way or another for about 30 years, a rather long time, but the industry has been changing very rapidly, and I'm very proud and happy to have been part of this change. We started with magnetic cards and a desperate fare system by various operators. Our first really objective was to have an integrated fare system. We made many changes along the way. Then we went on to our first smart card rollout in 2002, and then in 2009 we introduced a new fare system as well as a entire integrated ticketing system for the country. Today we are doing about 7 million trips a day. For a population of 4 million, we have about a base of more than 10 million cards. So I think the figures speak for themselves. And I'm very happy to engage any of you, either here or later, to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Russell Parrish. I'm Performance and Strategy Manager for Transport for London, working for London Overground and also for Crossrail. I have my key area of expertise is in operational performance, making sure that what we're effectively doing is delivering the right service for the customers. And prior to my joining Transport for London, I also held other performance roles within the UK rail industry, and prior to that, performance roles within the aviation industry.
Thanks, Russell. The theme of our conversation is threefold innovation in design, construction and operation. And in that context, I'd like to ask the panel what they feel are the most important factors in relation to design, construction, operation that need to be considered by operators, specifiers and others, particularly in a market such as this where there are significant new build projects. Andrew, would you like to start?
Yes, certainly, and thank you, Andrew. I would say there are a number of things looking across the specialities of building design, building our construction contracts, delivering the project, going into operation and running it. And particularly in the advent of seeking private sector investment, some of the work that I'm presently doing at the university is to look at PPP ability to come into the market, whether we're looking at the combined funds from pension funds, etc., and to analyze what are the problems. And one of the biggest problems that we have from our service consistently is the high transaction costs of actually doing that. And I would say that we have to look into our organizations to ensure that our definition is correct and that we fully understand that our scope and our requirements, both the contractor and the eventual operator. And predominantly I am from the operations end, although I've run projects, so that there's a very clear understanding between the operator, the project and delivery, and the contractor about exactly what is important in terms of delivery and your requirements. And at the same time for the operator to understand that every project requires trade-off and compromise. And it's up to the user and the operator to work together with the contractor and the project people to give the best product that you can get and to get value for money. So I think that would be the first thing that I would highlight.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Russell, Crossrail is a huge project, probably one of the most significant in Europe, certainly at the moment, and one that London awaits with bated breath. What factors do you feel have been most important in the specification phase and what is currently a delivery phase?
Well, I think probably one of the biggest challenges has already been alluded to is the trade-off between sort of the project side and the operating side. It's very easy for even small design changes to have an impact on how you operate a train service. So it's very, very important that there's that dialogue between the project team and the operations team at the earliest possible stage. And that is a dialogue that has to continue right the way through every phase of the construction and the move into operations. At the same time, whilst those elements are happening, because each of those things have an impact then on what you're going to ultimately deliver, the product that goes to the customer. And certainly at a very early stage you need to be looking at developing timetables. With Crossrail it's a particular challenge because of the interfaces with other operators, and including freight as well as intercity and outer urban operations. So it's quite a big challenge, and there's a lot of work to in terms of engagement and working with an assortment, a vast array of different industry parties, some of which you don't even have contractual relationships with, and trying to work those for the best interests of ultimately the users of the service.
Thanks very much. Joachim, you're responsible for next generation train project, the German Aerospace Institute, and we were just discussing how important it is, particularly in a new railway context, to see every element as part of a single system. In terms of rolling stock, how do you integrate the ultimate product with the design phase and the construction phase?
Yeah, focusing on passenger trains, and the objectives are to reduce travel time and reduce energy consumption. So we found out that it is very important to improve the attractiveness of trains, to get passengers on the trains, because it doesn't make any sense to have a very energy efficient train and no one is using it. So we have to look and to care about the passengers and improve not only passenger comfort on train, but also allow for easy access, better passenger information, and a very good and modern ticketing system.
Thank you very much. Alan, in terms of the civil engineering and construction side, from your experience, what particular factors have been most critical?
I think from everybody's point of view involved in constructing and producing a railway, I use the term an intelligent client, and I think it's important that clients make themselves as aware as possible of exactly what they're trying to achieve from their railway. We're fortunate in MTR that we are the operator. We also have a property division, and we also have a commercial division, and so we take lessons learned on exactly what we're trying to achieve in our property development when it's a rail plus property finance arrangement. We try and design our stations to have maximum capacity for commercial gain in terms of sales of shops, etc., etc. And all that is regularly fed back into our projects teams that provide the extensions to the railways. And in that respect, we have very clear scope clarity with our designers. We manage our designers. We avoid change once we've started that design process. And we also manage the expectations of our contractors when we set up our contracting partners in the way that we operate. So it goes back to knowing exactly what you're trying to achieve from your railway before you start.
Thanks, Alan. Sylvester, just looking at fares and, if you like, the commercial offer that the new railway would ultimately deliver, how do you approach the issue of pricing, structuring fares, establishing a fare offer, which, in the context of new railways in particular, is going to ensure that they're a commercial success?
Well, the fortunate thing in Singapore is that we have integrated fare system, and the apportionment of fares can be varied. So we recognize the fact that new rail lines will not be profitable for the first few years. So basically, we have coefficients in our formula which allows us to give a greater proportion of the revenue to new lines. And of course, we adjust it on an annual basis. Of course, we have to take into consideration all our operators are essentially public listed companies. So we've got to be quite prudent as to how we adjust this formula. But really, it's very difficult for new lines to be built without government support. In Singapore, in fact, the lines are built with government funds. The only difference is that when it comes to operations, the operators are fully responsible, ensuring the operating expenditure is met. And today, they are still somewhat profitable. But we still have to tweak the formula because in our situation anyway, buses are not profitable. So we have to try and give them a bigger proportion of the revenue. But to do all this really need quite a lot of political will because the players themselves are quite big listed companies. But so far we have been successful. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Mohammed, Tehran has a relatively new system. So obviously, that's particularly relevant, I would guess, to the situation in many countries in this region. From your experience, what were the key factors which applied during the design phase, for example?
Well, when we started the system about 20 years ago, we had only one metro company. We were constructing and we were operating the system. Later on, we split the company into two or different companies. Then we separated the operation company. We were constructing the metro and we handed it over to the operation company. And then we lost the close contact between the two companies. So we were not aware of the real need of the operators. And that caused us some problem. We didn't know the real demand what their real needs were for passengers, for the stations, for other equipments. And then we had to spend a lot of money to adjust these problems. What we decided is, it's for the last few years, that we have now close contact with the operators during the phase, during the design, during the construction. So they tell us what their real need is, and according to their needs, we do this construction, and I think that has been quite useful. So we saved a lot of costs of redoing a lot of things.
Thank you very much. There's some fantastic insights there. I think probably we can turn questions over to the audience now. Gentleman over there.
Good morning, Ramez Al-Assar, World Bank Senior Advisor to the Secretary General in Riyadh. The theme is innovation in design, construction, and operation, and you opened the session with discussion of PPP. And this is really a hot issue, not only in the GCC countries, but the Middle East, which approach to go, conventional or maybe one of the forms of the PPP. And we all know that such formula for PPP, it has to be very specific to the project and very specific to the country. And we have a lot of experience in the region that wasn't, so successful in especially design build. So from your experiences in the world, and what have we learned, what would you think an innovative way to build railways, capital-intensive infrastructure in the Middle East and the GCC countries, where we know that financial resources, yes, they are important, but not in scarcity as much as in Europe or United States. And it would be useful to us to really exchange this experience to see what are maybe the best models for the construction of the railway and the service provision based on what you know exactly in the region and internationally.
Thank you very much. In many ways, that's one of the key questions, isn't it? And I think many panel members have got experience of PPP-type structures. Andrew, would you like to say a few words on that to start?
Yes, I think I would agree with you thoroughly that every railway is different. And of course, your region is very different from most. So it's very important to control the definition of what you're trying to achieve. A railway is just not a railway. We're building railways to improve the vitality of our economies, to support our social development and the development of the nation. And so I think governments need to understand what are the values that they're looking for from this investment, and to put in place a gated approach where you intercede at the important points of moving on. So in setting the first objectives, to make sure that there is a consensus on those objectives for what the investment will yield, and convert those objectives into a set of requirements. And then look to the market to say, how are we going to do this? Is it going to be a combined approach where we are going to perhaps build the civil works and look for a PPP for the integrated infrastructure works? And to really understand what is the model, the long-term financing model for this 30-year investment, so that we will have successful design, successful construction, and successful operation. And then to ensure that that doesn't proceed automatically. We take it to the next phase so that we have the preliminary design. And at that stage, in some countries, and I quote Korea for one, they have an independent assessment body. Not the project people that you appoint within the government, but another independent government-sponsored body who will look at it and say, this meets your original requirements, this is value for money, and at that stage you might stop and redesign the project if it doesn't meet the final objectives. And then to have a very strong control of your costs, a very strong control of the definition of requirements, the development of the contracts, and to re-look at that again before going to market to ensure that those contracts really are reflecting what you need. And take that process of oversight into the actual construction itself. So we don't stand back and say, you know, we know that you've built railways before, you know you will deliver it, but to keep that oversight going right through up until the commissioning and delivery. And to be involved at some of the key risk assessments at key stages of that full cycle, right through into operations. So I think that's some of the key recommendations I would make on a broad scale.
Thank you very much.
If I could just follow up the gentleman's point. I think what you were referring to is the Saudi experience, where they looked at PPPs for high-speed rail and then found that because of what you mentioned, Alan, right at the beginning, the transaction time and the transaction costs, it was simply easier to do it and cheaper. I mean, Saudi Arabia can afford it anyway, but it can actually do it. Now, how do you see that it's possible to overcome these transaction costs? And maybe also, Andrew, maybe you might like to, as being one of the beneficiaries, if I might say so, of the transaction costs?
Yes.
How you tackle that?
I think, yes, I think really you've got to understand that when you go to private investment, it is a different world. And to understand that your normal government structures for managing that, the people that you may have depended in the past who relate their issues to standards and to building it, have to operate and work in a different way. So I think it's necessary to enable your people to be able to operate in a more commercial environment, to make them more aware of commercial trade-offs. And that's why I really recommend that you have a strong intervention in risk and risk assessment at the different stages as we unfold a project, because you actually have to bring about some change in your own administration in terms of how you would look after a PPP project. And it's always beneficial, as we say, that you retain some skin in the game. So I think I used to run MTR Hong Kong for many years. It is very proud of a railway that pays for itself, but there is no railway that pays fully from the fare box for everything. So you really have to understand the ongoing financial and funding model that the operating railway will have as well. And to involve those types of people, and we heard some of my colleagues say earlier, involving the end user, the end operator, and the end owner, the authority that will own these assets right from the beginning, and to change, be prepared to change your normal government processes to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think from a legal perspective, I'd just amplify what Andrew's just said. I think the key to controlling transaction costs, which can be a barrier, is really a clear early focus on what a PPP type structure is intended to deliver, and then real discipline throughout the project in making sure that you stick to the script and don't allow the project to become something that it wasn't originally intended to be. Any more questions from the audience?
You know, we really have tons of information on PPP, including the World Bank, publications, advices, and so forth. But if I want to talk results on the ground and being very pragmatic, what could we learn from these experiences in the GCC countries? We know for a fact, this is my own experience, if you want to do any form of PPP, you have to have well-defined scope of work. If you talk about railway projects, simply if you take the alignment, it will never be defined. It continues to change, not the normal change, but it's unexpected, unforeseen changes. If we talk about design build, which many of the consulting firms are advising our clients now, okay, to save time, to control cost, and to ensure that liability of the design and construction lies in one body, we failed in that. We really failed in that, simply because that requires competency, skills, know-how, which we may not have it in-house, okay? That requires very well-defined scope of work. That requires many things. End of that, if you look our own experience, if you talk about country X in the GCC countries, we have delayed the project 5 to 6 years because we want to go BOT, and finally we went to the conventional way because these public transport project, there is public service obligation, which will never make money in any kind of investment, you know. And then there is another country which is also delayed 2 to 3 years simply because the consultant was telling them how to do with PPP. not if the project is basically doable through PPP. And then finally they went again and they are going to the conventional way. My point I want to raise, and I always discuss it, is simply we have a wealth of experience in the region. We have almost every single big company, consultants, suppliers, contractors, and we continue receiving almost the same advice. You should look into PPP, you should look design and build, it's better, it's this. Have we had something really tangible that we can advise the client based on the very actual conditions in the region that, gentlemen, you may not be able to do it this way? First of all, before you go to the approach PPP, is it doable PPP? Instead of wasting a lot of time, IFC, IMF, World Bank, you name it, they continue to advise the same thing. They come to the client and say, we want to do it PPP. How can we do it? Okay, we'll structure it for you. Is it really structurable to be PPP? That's my point. And this is what we count on your experiences to come to the client and say, hey, maybe your project is not subject to the PPP.
I think Alan, do you want to say a few words about sort of creep in scope, if you like, and how you keep a project close to the original design? I think just a few words on. Okay.
I think this is where, and Andrew touched on it, when I say you've got to really be an intelligent client and keep a strong hold on exactly what you're trying to achieve. I'm a great believer that you cannot shed risk. Risks always come back to you as a client if you're providing the majority of the funds, etc., etc. And by giving away some of those risks to others to manage, they don't have the same risk profiles as you and don't have the same priorities. And I think that the other thing that we're trying to cover a whole range of types of railways, but the other important thing, I think, is when you come to look at extending railways, because once you've got an operating railway in process, anytime you want to interface with that operating railway, with interchanges and things like this, you've got to keep strong definition on scope, etc., because the last thing you want is for construction work in an interchange to interrupt and affect the operating railways nearby. And I think so you've got to really plan ahead on what you're trying to achieve overall for your particular rail project in that respect and manage those risks.
Alan, Andrew, I think if I could just comment, in referring to the speaker from the floor about PPP, I think it's worth to stand back and say, why do you want a PPP? And there are a few reasons for it. PPP is very popular in places that don't have money, such as Europe, perhaps America. So in this region, I would say that the first instance is not because you lack the ability to invest. PPP is also popular because it can bring innovation, it can deliver supposedly at reduced cost, and it can get to market in a quicker time. But that can only happen if you really have oversight on the PPP and make sure that you're getting value for money. And contractors will often interpret that this is a cheaper job, etc., when in fact you're not getting, at the end of the day, what you really want in value for money. But I think the third issue that may be more applicable to the region is that at the end of the day, you have to run and operate this installation. You have to govern and oversee your investment, and you do not have the resources, you do not have the capability at present. So your reasons for going into the PPP in the first place have to be well thought out, and why you want a PPP. It's not for money. It may not be for the innovation, because railways really are not highly innovative. The industry produces on tranche by tranche new technologies, etc., and if it's a new railway, you will take that on board. It's really about the capability and building, you might say, the national capability to execute these works. And so I would say that in my opinion, the PPP represents quite a small portion of your investment, and to look at it very carefully and make sure that you are going to get those objectives. So it may not necessarily be the build objectives out of the PPP. You come out of it with experienced staff who can run installations. You come out of it with experienced people who can manage contractors well into the future and know the technology. So I tend to think of it around that way, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Andrew.